The maid whispered to her daughter about their secret. The billionaire overheard and couldn't believe it. The late afternoon sun cast golden streaks across the manicured gardens of the Hartwell estate, where 27-year-old Elena Martinez knelt beside a bed of roses, her calloused hands gentle as she pruned each stem with practiced care. 3-year-old Sophia sat nearby on a blanket, her dark curls catching the light as she arranged wildflowers into a lopsided crown, humming a melody that seemed to belong only to her. Elena paused in her work, watching her daughter with an expression that blended fierce love with bone-deep exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that came from working 2 jobs, from nights spent worrying about rent and doctor's appointments, and whether the shoes Sophia wore would last another month. But in moments like these, when Sophia's laughter rippled through the air like music, Elena felt something close to peace. "Mommy, look." Sophia held up her flower crown triumphantly, petals already wilting in her small fists. Elena's heart swelled. She set down her pruning shears and moved to sit beside her daughter, pulling the little girl into her lap. Sophia smelled of sunshine and the lavender soap Elena had managed to buy on sale last week. For a moment, she allowed herself to simply hold her child, to memorize the weight of her, the warmth. "It's beautiful, mi amor," Elena whispered, placing a kiss on Sophia's temple. "Just like you." Sophia giggled, squirming with delight. Then her expression turned serious in that suddenly solemn way that only young children could manage. "Mommy, when will we have our own garden?" The question pierced Elena's chest like a thorn. She had been preparing for this conversation, rehearsing it in the quiet hours before dawn when she couldn't sleep. But preparation didn't make it any easier. "Sophia, mi corazón," Elena began softly, tucking a curl behind her daughter's ear. "I need to tell you something important." She glanced around the garden, ensuring they were alone. The estate was vast, and Mr. Hartwell was supposed to be in his study, buried in work as always. "We might not be able to stay here much longer." Sophia's eyes, so large and trusting, widened with confusion. "But this is home." "No, baby," Elena's voice cracked. "This is where Mommy works. Our home is the small apartment in the city. Remember?" The child's lower lip trembled. "But I like it here. I like the big trees and the nice kitchen lady who gives me cookies." Elena pulled Sophia closer, fighting back her own tears. "I know, sweetheart. I know. But Mommy might need to find a different job soon. One that pays better, so we can have our own place with a garden. So I can be home more with you." What Elena didn't say, what she couldn't say, was that she'd received her termination notice that morning. Budget cuts, they'd called it. The Hartwell estate was downsizing staff, and as the newest hire, Elena was among the first to go. She had 2 weeks. 2 weeks to find another job, to figure out how to keep Sophia fed and safe and happy while their world crumbled once again. "Will we be okay, Mommy?" Sophia asked, her voice small. Elena took a shaky breath, forcing brightness into her voice even as despair clawed at her throat. "Yes, baby. We'll always be okay. Because we have each other, and that's the most important thing. You and me, we're a team. Right?" "Right," Sophia echoed, but uncertainty lingered in her eyes. "I promise you," Elena whispered, more to herself than to her daughter. "I will give you everything. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday, mi amor, you will have your own garden. You'll have a home where you feel safe and loved, where you can plant all the flowers you want. I promise you this, even if I have to work every day for the rest of my life." Unknown to Elena, 34-year-old Alexander Hartwell stood frozen on the stone pathway just beyond a hedge of boxwoods, his expensive suit jacket slung over one shoulder, his phone call forgotten. He'd come out for some air, to escape the suffocating walls of a study and the endless demands of running a business empire he'd never asked for. He'd been about to announce his presence when he'd heard the woman's voice, his gardener's voice, soft and breaking with emotion. And then he'd heard the words that made him stop breathing. "We might not be able to stay here much longer." Alexander knew what that meant. He'd approved the staff reductions himself, barely glancing at the names on the list his head of household had presented. Just signatures on paper. Numbers on a spreadsheet. Ways to trim unnecessary expenses from an estate he barely noticed, a property that felt more like a museum than a home. He'd never stopped to think about the faces behind those names, the lives he was disrupting with the stroke of a pen. Now, watching through the gap in the hedges, he saw Elena Martinez truly for the first time. Not just the quiet woman in work clothes who tended his gardens, whose presence he'd barely registered in the 6 months she'd been employed, but a young mother with dirt under her fingernails and hope dying in her eyes, making promises to a little girl who believed her mother could move mountains. The child, Sophia, he'd heard her called, leaned against her mother's chest, and Elena began to hum the same melody he'd heard the girl singing earlier. A lullaby, he realized, soft and sweet and devastatingly sad. Alexander's chest tightened with an emotion he couldn't name. Shame, perhaps. Or recognition of a truth he'd been avoiding for years, that his money, his success, his carefully controlled world had insulated him from the reality of how most people lived. How they struggled. How they broke. He should walk away. Mind his own business. These weren't his problems to solve. But as he watched Elena wipe away tears she didn't want her daughter to see, as he watched her straighten her spine and paste on a brave smile, something shifted inside him. Something that felt dangerously close to purpose. Alexander Hartwell hadn't felt purposeful in a very long time. Quietly, he backed away, his mind already racing with questions he had no right to ask and solutions he had no business offering. He didn't know yet what he was going to do. But as he returned to his study and pulled up the staff reduction list on his computer, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Elena Martinez's name was coming off that list. And somehow, someway, he was going to make sure that little girl got her garden. Elena's hands trembled as she folded Sophia's tiny shirts, packing them into the worn suitcase that had traveled with them through 4 apartments in 3 years. Morning light filtered through the small window of their quarters, a converted carriage house on the edge of the estate, illuminating the sparse room they'd called home. In 2 days, this chapter would end, and Elena had no idea where the next one would begin. She'd spent the past week applying to every position she could find, housekeeping at hotels, waitressing at diners, cleaning offices at night. Anything that might cover rent and childcare. So far, nothing. The rejection emails piled up in her inbox like stones, weighing her down with each refresh. Mommy, why are you putting away my favorite shirt? Sophia appeared in the doorway, her hair still mussed from sleep, clutching the stuffed rabbit that Elena had stitched together from fabric scraps. We're just organizing, baby, Elena lied, hating herself for it. She'd have to tell Sophia the truth soon. That they were leaving. That once again, they'd have to start over. A sharp knock at the door made them both jump. Elena's stomach dropped. Mrs. Chun, the head of household, had been professionally cold since delivering the termination notice. Perhaps she'd come to ensure Elena was preparing to leave on schedule. With a deep breath, Elena smoothed her hair and opened the door. But it wasn't Mrs. Chun standing on her doorstep. It was Alexander Hartwell himself. Elena had seen her employer perhaps half a dozen times in 6 months, always from a distance, always briefly. He was tall, with dark hair that perpetually looked like he'd been running his hands through it, and eyes that seemed to carry the weight of unspoken burdens. The business magazines called him a genius, a visionary, a man who doubled his inherited fortune before his 30th birthday. The staff called him distant, fair, and utterly unreachable. Now he stood in her doorway, dressed not in his usual suit but in casual slacks and a white button-down with the sleeves rolled up, looking decidedly uncomfortable. Mr. Hartwell, Elena stammered, her pulse racing. Can I help you with something? May I come in? His voice was deeper than she'd expected, quieter. I'd like to speak with you, if you have a moment. Confused and slightly terrified, Elena stepped aside. Her mind raced through possibilities. None of them good. Had she damaged something in the garden? Had Sophia wandered where she shouldn't have? Alexander entered the small space, and Elena suddenly saw her home through his eyes. The patched furniture, the makeshift bookshelf made from crates, the single photograph on the wall, her parents, dead now for 5 years, smiling in front of the modest house in Phoenix, where she'd grown up. Sophia peeked out from behind Elena's legs, staring at the stranger with wide eyes. Alexander's expression softened when he saw the child. He crouched down, putting himself at her level. "Hello. You must be Sophia. I'm Alexander. I've heard you singing in the gardens. You have a beautiful voice." Sophia's grip on Elena's leg loosened slightly. "Thank you," she whispered, then added with childish candor. "You're very tall." A smile touched Alexander's lips, the first genuine smile Elena had ever seen from him. "I suppose I am. Do you like flowers, Sophia?" The little girl nodded enthusiastically. "Mommy teaches me their names. My favorite is the roses. The pink ones." "Those are called Queen Elizabeth roses," Alexander said. "They were my mother's favorites, too." Something flickered across his face, grief, perhaps, or memory, and then it was gone. He stood, turning his attention back to Elena, his expression becoming businesslike once more. "Ms. Martinez, I'll get straight to the point. I'm here to rescind your termination." Elena's breath caught. "I'm sorry, what?" "You're no longer being let go. If you wish to remain on staff, your position is secure." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I've reviewed the personnel decisions, and I believe they were made hastily. You've done excellent work with the gardens. I'd like you to stay." Elena's mind reeled. This didn't make sense. "But," Mrs. Chun said, "the budget." "The budget is my concern, not yours," Alexander interrupted, not unkindly. "I'm telling you that your job is safe. In fact, I'd like to offer you a new arrangement." He glanced around the small room again, and Elena felt a flush of embarrassment at their meager belongings. "These quarters are inadequate for you and your daughter. There's a cottage on the north side of the property that's been sitting empty. 2 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, a yard. It's yours if you want it. No additional rent." Elena couldn't process what she was hearing. "Mr. Hartwell, I don't understand. Why would you?" "Because I've been walking around blind," he said, and there was something raw in his voice that made Elena truly look at him for the first time. Behind the expensive clothes and the commanding presence, she saw exhaustion. Loneliness. "I inherited all of this." He gestured vaguely, encompassing the estate, the wealth, everything, and I've been so focused on managing it, on maintaining it, that I forgot it's not just property. It's not just numbers. People live here, work here. You and your daughter deserve better than what I've been providing." Elena's throat tightened. "Mr. Hartwell, that's very generous, but I can't accept charity." "It's not charity," he said firmly. "You work hard. Harder than anyone should have to. I've seen you out there before dawn, staying long after your shift ends. The gardens have never looked better. You've earned a living wage and proper housing. I should have provided that from the beginning." Sophia tugged on Elena's sleeve. "Mommy, does this mean we can stay? With the flowers?" Elena looked down at her daughter's hopeful face, then back at Alexander. Pride warred with desperation inside her. She'd spent her entire adult life refusing handouts, working herself to exhaustion to prove she could make it on her own. But this wasn't just about her anymore. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," Alexander replied. "Please. Let me do this one thing right." There was something in his eyes, a plea that transcended employer and employee, that spoke to something deeper. He needed this as much as she did, Elena realized with startling clarity. For reasons she didn't understand, this moment mattered to him. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Thank you, Mr. Hartwell. Thank you so much." Relief washed over his features. "Alexander," he corrected gently. "Please, just call me Alexander." That afternoon, Alexander personally helped Elena move their belongings to the cottage. It was a charming structure she'd passed countless times, but never imagined entering. Stone walls covered in climbing roses, leaded glass windows, and inside, furniture that was simple but well-made. The kitchen had real counter space and a window overlooking a small garden plot. The bedrooms were cozy, with soft beds and clean linens already in place. Sophia ran from room to room, squealing with delight, while Elena stood in the kitchen trying not to cry. "There's a garden plot out back," Alexander said, joining her at the window. It's overgrown now, but if you wanted to plant something there for Sophia? He trailed off, awkward again. Elena turned to him, seeing him clearly now. Not as her unreachable employer, but as a man who'd somehow heard her whispered promises and decided to help make them real. "You heard us," she said softly. "In the garden. That day when Sophia asked about having our own place." Alexander didn't deny it. "I did. I'm sorry for eavesdropping. But I'm not sorry for what it made me realize." Which was that I've been living in this enormous house, surrounded by beautiful things, and I've been completely alone. Meanwhile, you've been living in a room barely big enough to turn around in, and you have everything that matters. He met her eyes. You have love, purpose, someone who needs you. I'd forgotten what any of that felt like. The vulnerability in his admission took Elena's breath away. "Mr. Hartwell, Alexander, you barely know us." "I know enough," he said quietly. "I know that you're a good mother, that you work yourself to exhaustion for your daughter, that you make promises you're terrified you can't keep, but you'll die trying. I know more about you from 5 minutes in that garden than I've learned about anyone in years." Before Elena could respond, Sophia came running in, grabbing Alexander's hand with unself-conscious trust. "Come see my room. It has a window seat." Alexander allowed himself to be pulled away, and Elena watched them go, her heart full of emotions she couldn't name. Gratitude, certainly. Relief. But also something else. Something that felt dangerous and hopeful at the same time. As the afternoon sun painted the cottage in golden light, as Sophia's laughter echoed through rooms that suddenly felt like home, Elena allowed herself to believe in possibilities she'd long ago abandoned. Maybe, just maybe, miracles still happened. Over the next few weeks, something unexpected began to bloom at the Hartwell estate, and it had nothing to do with Elena's careful tending of the gardens. It started small. Alexander began taking his morning coffee on the terrace instead of in his study, timing it precisely to when Elena arrived for work. He'd nod to her and she'd nod back, and gradually those nods evolved into brief exchanges about the weather, the roses, the progress of Sophia's little garden plot behind the cottage. She planted tomatoes, Elena told him one Thursday morning, a smile playing at her lips. "She's convinced they're going to be as big as her head." Alexander laughed. Actually laughed, and the sound was so unexpected that Elena dropped her pruning shears. She'd been working at the estate for 7 months now, counting the first 6 before the reprieve, and she'd never heard him laugh before. "I'm sorry," he said, still grinning. "It's just, I can picture her saying that. She's very confident, isn't she?" "Stubborn is what she is," Elena replied, but her tone was full of affection. "She gets it from me." "Is that so?" Alexander's eyes glinted with something that might have been amusement. "I'd never have guessed." The teasing caught Elena off guard. It felt like the beginning of something resembling friendship, and she wasn't sure how to navigate it. He was still her employer, still the billionaire who owned everything she could see in every direction. But he was also becoming a person to her, not just a distant figure glimpsed through windows. Sophia accelerated the shift, as children often do, operating on a social frequency that had no concept of class or boundaries. One Saturday afternoon, when Alexander was walking the grounds, trying to clear his head from a particularly frustrating conference call, he heard a small voice call out, "Alexander, come see." He turned to find Sophia running toward him, dirt smudged on her cheek, her overalls covered in mud. Elena followed behind, looking apologetic. "Sophia, leave Mr. Hartwell alone." "It's fine," Alexander interrupted, crouching down as Sophia reached him. "What did you want to show me?" "My tomatoes have babies." Sophia grabbed his hand without hesitation, tugging him toward the cottage. "Come, come." Elena mouthed, "I'm sorry," over her daughter's head, but Alexander waved her off. Truth be told, he was grateful for the interruption. The conference call had been with his board of directors, all of them pressing him to make decisions about mergers and acquisitions and things that seemed increasingly meaningless. In Sophia's garden plot, sure enough, tiny green tomatoes hung from the vines she and Elena had so carefully staked. "Look." Sophia pointed with pure joy. We're gonna have so many. That's amazing, Alexander said, and found that he meant it. When was the last time he'd been excited about something growing? When had he last paid attention to anything that didn't involve profit margins and quarterly reports? Mommy says we can make salsa, Sophia continued, launching into an elaborate description of the process that involved smashing things and lots of peppers. As Alexander listened to the little girl's chatter, he became aware of Elena watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not suspicious, exactly, but cautious. Wondering, perhaps, why a man like him was spending his Saturday afternoon admiring a 3-year-old's tomato plants. He wanted the same thing himself, and came to a realization that should have frightened him, but instead felt like relief. He was lonely. Desperately, achingly lonely. And somehow, in the presence of this woman who worked his gardens and her daughter, who saw no difference between a billionaire and anyone else, he felt less alone. "Stay for dinner," Elena heard herself say, the words escaping before wisdom could stop them. "It's nothing fancy, just chicken and rice, but if you're not busy." She regretted it immediately. What was she thinking? Inviting her employer to her home like they were friends, like there wasn't a massive power imbalance between them? But Alexander's face transformed. "I'd like that," he said quietly. "Very much. If you're sure." "Yay." Sophia clapped her hands. "You can sit in the special chair." That evening, Alexander Hartwell sat at Elena Martinez's small kitchen table in the cottage he'd given her, eating chicken and rice from mismatched plates, and felt more at home than he had in his own mansion in years. Sophia narrated the entire meal, telling Alexander about her stuffed animals. "This is Señor Conejo. He's from Mommy's mama, her favorite colors, all the pinks, every single one, and her dreams of becoming a veterinarian who also grows flowers, because animals need pretty things too." Elena interjected occasionally, softening her daughter's more outrageous claims. "She's not actually planning to keep a zebra in the garden, don't worry," but mostly she watched the interaction with a mixture of warmth and wariness. "You're good with her," Elena said later, after Sophia had been tucked into bed and they stood in the kitchen, Elena washing dishes while Alexander dried them, an arrangement he'd insisted on despite her protests. "She's easy to be good with," Alexander replied. "She's wonderful. You've done an incredible job raising her." Elena's hands stilled in the soapy water. "It hasn't been easy. Her father." She trailed off, then seemed to decide to continue. "He left when I told him I was pregnant. Said he wasn't ready for the responsibility. I haven't heard from him since." "I'm sorry," Alexander said, and meant it. "Don't be. We're better off without him." Elena resumed scrubbing a plate with more force than necessary. "Sophia and I were a team. We don't need anyone else." The statement felt like a boundary being drawn, and Alexander recognized it. She was warning him, perhaps, not to get too close. Not to become important, because people who became important could leave. "I understand that," he said carefully. "But maybe you don't always have to do it alone. Maybe it's okay to let people help sometimes." Elena turned to look at him, her hands still submerged in the dishwater, her expression unreadable. "Is that what this is? You helping?" "I'd like it to be friendship," Alexander admitted. "If you'd allow it." The words hung between them, honest and vulnerable and dangerous. Employers and employees weren't supposed to be friends. Billionaires and single mothers who cleaned their estates weren't supposed to share dinners and inside jokes and the comfortable silence that came with washing dishes side by side. But as Elena studied his face, searching for ulterior motives and finding only sincerity, something in her carefully constructed walls began to crack. "Okay," she said softly. "Friends." Alexander smiled, and it transformed his entire face, making him look younger, lighter. Friends. As the weeks turned into months, that friendship deepened in ways neither of them had anticipated. Alexander began spending more time away from his study, finding excuses to be outside when Elena was working. He'd roll up his sleeves and help her with heavier tasks, moving bags of mulch, pruning high branches, replanting sections of the garden. Mrs. Chun and the other staff noticed, of course. Eyebrows were raised. Whispers circulated. But Alexander was beyond caring what anyone thought. For the first time in years, he felt like himself. Like more than just the heir to a fortune, the CEO of companies he'd never wanted to run, the lonely man in a house full of empty rooms. Elena fought it at first, this growing connection between them. She'd remind herself of the distance that should exist, the proper boundaries between employer and employee. But Alexander made it impossible to maintain those walls. He was kind to Sophia, genuinely interested in her day, full of terrible jokes that made the little girl giggle until she got hiccups. And with Elena, he was something else entirely. He listened when she talked about her parents, her grief over losing them in a car accident just before Sophia was born. He shared his own losses, his mother to cancer when he was 15, his father to a heart attack 2 years ago, leaving him with an empire he'd never asked for and no idea how to fill the void. "People think money solves everything," Alexander said one evening, sitting on the steps of Elena's cottage while she planted evening primrose nearby. Sophia was asleep inside, and the late summer air was soft with the scent of jasmine. "But it doesn't solve loneliness. It doesn't solve not knowing your purpose. Sometimes I think it makes it worse, actually. Everyone wants something from you, but no one wants you." Elena sat back on her heels, looking at him with understanding. "Is that why you've been spending so much time out here? To escape all that?" "Partly," he admitted. "But mostly because when I'm here with you and Sophia, I remember what it feels like to be real. To matter for reasons that have nothing to do with my bank account." The vulnerability in his confession made Elena's heart ache. She'd spent so long thinking of wealthy people as immune to pain, insulated by their privilege from the struggles that consumed her daily life. But looking at Alexander now, at the exhaustion in his eyes, the loneliness he tried so hard to hide, she realized that pain wore many disguises. "You do matter," she said quietly. "Not because of what you have, but because of who you are." The person who heard a scared mother making promises she didn't know how to keep and decided to help. The person who sits through Sophia's very long stories about her stuffed animals without checking his phone once. The person who's out here getting dirt under his fingernails when he could be inside in air conditioning. That person matters, Alexander. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a recognition, an acknowledgement of feelings neither was ready to name. "Thank you," Alexander whispered. As the stars began to emerge overhead, as the evening sounds of the garden surrounded them, both Elena and Alexander felt the walls they'd built around their hearts begin to crumble. Not all at once, but slowly, carefully, brick by brick. It was terrifying. It was wonderful. It was the beginning of something neither of them had planned, but both of them desperately needed. Autumn arrived at the Hartwell estate in a wash of gold and crimson, transforming the manicured gardens into something wild and beautiful. Elena had never experienced fall quite like this. Growing up in Phoenix, the seasons had been subtle shifts in heat rather than the dramatic transformation of colors she witnessed now. "It's like the trees are on fire," she breathed one October morning, standing with Alexander at the edge of the property, watching the sunrise paint the maples in shades of copper and flame. "My mother used to say that autumn was the earth showing off before winter," Alexander replied, his breath visible in the crisp air. One last burst of glory before the quiet. These morning meetings had become routine now, something neither of them had explicitly arranged, but both had come to depend on. Elena would arrive early, and Alexander would somehow be there, 2 cups of coffee in hand, ready to walk the grounds with her before the day's responsibilities claimed them both. The staff had long since stopped gossiping about it, though Mrs. Chen still watched their interactions with an expression Elena couldn't quite decipher. Concern, perhaps. Or maybe just confusion about how a friendship like theirs could exist across such different worlds. "Sophia wants to know if you're coming to her birthday party," Elena said, breaking the comfortable silence. "It's next Saturday. She's turning 4, and apparently, it's not a real party unless you're there." Alexander's smile was immediate and genuine. "I wouldn't miss it. What does one bring to a 4-year-old's birthday party?" "Your presence is enough," Elena assured him. "Though I warn you, she's been planning it for weeks. There will be a princess theme, homemade decorations, and probably enough cake to feed 20 people even though it's just going to be us 3 and maybe a couple of kids from the staff's families." "Sounds perfect," Alexander said, and meant it. That Saturday, Alexander showed up to the cottage with a gift that made Elena's breath catch. A child-sized gardening set with pink tools and a sun had embroidered with Sophia's name. But more than that, he'd brought something unexpected. A sapling in a pot, its tag reading, Pink Rose, Sophia. I had it custom named, Alexander explained, suddenly looking uncertain. There's a nursery that specializes in registering new rose varieties. This one is a hybrid that blooms twice a year. I thought she might like having a flower named after her. For her garden. Elena's eyes filled with tears. Alexander, this is too much. No, he interrupted gently. It's not enough. It will never be enough to thank you for what you've given me. Both of you. Sophia's squeal of delight when she saw the gifts saved Elena from having to respond. The little girl threw her arms around Alexander's legs, chattering a mile a minute about how she was going to take care of her rose and her tools, and could they plan it right now, please, please, please? The party was chaotic and joyful, filled with games that Alexander entered into with surprising enthusiasm. He helped pin tails on paper donkeys while wearing a blindfold, ate cake with pink frosting that stained his lips, and let Sophia paint his nails with glittery polish because everyone at a princess party needs pretty nails. Elena captured it all in her mind like photographs, memorizing the sound of Alexander's laughter, the way he looked at her daughter with genuine affection, the warmth in his eyes when his gaze found hers across the room. After the party, after the other children had gone home and Sophia had crashed hard, falling asleep surrounded by her gifts, Elena and Alexander cleaned up in companionable silence. Thank you, Elena said softly, for making this day so special for her. Thank you for letting me be part of it, Alexander replied. He was at the sink, washing dishes again, a ritual that had become theirs. I can't remember the last time I felt this content. Is that strange? No, Elena said, drying a plate and setting it carefully on the counter. I don't think it's strange at all. Alexander turned off the water, drying his hands slowly, as if gathering courage. Elena, I need to tell you something. Her heart began to race. She knew, somehow, what was coming, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. These past few months, Alexander continued, being here with you, with Sophia, it's changed me. Made me remember what it feels like to look forward to each day. To have purpose beyond board meetings and quarterly reports. You've given me that. You've both given me that. Alexander. Elena started, but he pressed on. I know this is complicated. I know there's an imbalance here. I'm your employer, you work for me, and that makes everything messy. But I can't pretend anymore that this is just friendship. I care about you, Elena. About both of you. Deeply. The words hung in the air between them, honest and terrifying and wonderful. Elena's hands trembled as she set down the dish towel. I care about you too, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. That's what scares me. I've worked so hard to build a stable life for Sophia, to prove I could do it on my own. And now you're here and you're in our lives, and I'm terrified of what happens if this doesn't work. If you wake up one day and realize you're a billionaire who could have anyone, and we're just what? Alexander interrupted, stepping closer. Just the people who make me feel alive for the first time in years? Just the mother and daughter who taught me that wealth means nothing without connection? Elena, you're not just anything. You're everything. Tears spilled down Elena's cheeks. But what about Sophia? If we start something and it ends, it won't just hurt me. It'll hurt her. She's already gotten so attached to you. She asks about you constantly, draws you pictures, saves jokes to tell you. If you leave... I'm not going to leave, Alexander said fiercely. Elena, look at me. I'm not him. I'm not your father, who abandoned you. I'm not Sophia's father, who walked away. I'm here, and I want to stay. Not because I feel obligated, but because I choose it. Because being with you two is the first choice I've made in years that's been entirely mine. Elena searched his face, looking for doubt, for hesitation, for any sign that this was temporary infatuation rather than something real. But all she saw was sincerity and hope and something that looked remarkably like love. I'm scared, she whispered. I know, Alexander replied, gently wiping tears from her cheeks. I'm scared too. I've never done this before. Never let anyone this close. Never wanted to. But I'm willing to be scared if you are. Elena thought about all the risks she'd taken in her life. Leaving Phoenix with nothing but a suitcase and a baby. Working 3 jobs to keep them afloat. Building a life from scratch over and over again. Every choice had been a leap of faith, a bet on herself and her ability to survive. Maybe it was time to bet on someone else too. Okay, she breathed. Okay, yes. Alexander's smile was brilliant and relieved. He pulled her into his arms, and Elena let herself melt into his embrace, let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. From Sophia's bedroom, they heard a sleepy voice call out, "Mommy?" Elena pulled back, wiping her eyes and trying to compose herself. "I should go," Alexander said softly. "I'll finish up here." Elena found Sophia sitting up in bed, rubbing her eyes. Did Alexander leave? Not yet, baby. He's still here. Good, Sophia mumbled, lying back down. I like when he's here. It feels like family. Elena's heart clenched. Is that so?
Mom.
Like we're not just you and me anymore. Like we're bigger. Sophia's eyes were already closing again. That's good, right, Mommy? Yeah, baby, Elena whispered, tucking the blanket around her daughter. That's good. When she returned to the kitchen, Alexander was waiting by the door, ready to leave. But there was something different in the way he looked at her now, a promise, a commitment, a future taking shape. Dinner tomorrow, he asked. All 3 of us. At the main house. I want to show you something. What? It's a surprise, he said with a mysterious smile. Trust me? Elena thought about Sophia's words. It feels like family. Thought about the walls she'd spent years building, the fear she'd carried like armor. And made another leap of faith. I trust you, she said. The kiss that followed was soft and sweet and full of promise, a beginning rather than an ending, a door opening rather than closing. As Alexander walked back to the main house under a sky full of stars, Elena stood in her doorway and let herself hope. Let herself believe in the possibility of happy endings, even for people like her. Inside, Sophia slept peacefully, dreaming of roses and princesses and families that chose each other. And in the main house, Alexander sat at his desk, not to work, but to write, to plan, to imagine a future that just hours ago had seemed impossible, but now felt inevitable. Everything was about to change. And for once, that didn't feel frightening at all. The surprise Alexander had promised turned out to be the mansion's east wing, a series of rooms that had been closed off since his mother's death, covered in dust cloths and shadows. This was hers, Alexander explained, pulling back curtains to let autumn sunlight flood into what revealed itself to be an artist's studio. Canvases lined the walls, paintings of gardens and landscapes and portraits full of life. My mother's a painter. Not professionally, but passionately. My father had this wing built for her. Sophia's eyes went wide as she took in the space. It's like a castle, she breathed. She would have loved you, Alexander said softly, watching the little girl spin in circles, her arms outstretched. She always wanted this house to be filled with children and laughter. Instead, it was just me, and I was always so quiet. Elena moved closer to examine the paintings. They were beautiful, skilled, but more than that, filled with emotion. Why did you close it off? After she died, my father couldn't stand to see her things. He locked it up and I never had the heart to open it again. Until now. Alexander turned to Elena. I want to bring this wing back to life. I was thinking it could be a space for Sophia, a playroom, an art room, whatever she wants. And maybe, he hesitated, maybe other children too. I've been thinking about what to do with this estate, how to give it purpose. What if we opened it up? Created programs for kids in the area who don't have access to art or gardens or space, to just be children. Elena stared at him. Alexander, that's incredible. But that's a huge undertaking. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything, he replied. You both have shown me what matters. Connection.
Growth.
Giving back. I want this place to mean something beyond just being a monument to wealth. Over the following weeks, Alexander threw himself into the project with an enthusiasm Elena had never seen. He hired contractors, met with community organizers, and spent his evenings sketching plans with Sophia's help, which mostly consisted of her adding flowers and rainbows to everything. But as the renovation progressed, whispers began to circulate. Not just among the staff, but in Alexander's social circles, in board meetings, in the tabloids that had started noticing the billionaire spending time with his gardener and her daughter. The first article appeared on a Tuesday morning. Mrs. Chen brought it to Alexander's study, her expression troubled. "You should see this, sir." The headline made his blood run cold. Billionaire's new obsession, staff member and her child. Is this love or a midlife crisis? The article was full of speculation, thinly veiled insinuations, and unnamed sources questioning his judgment. But worse than the article itself was the photo. Alexander, Elena, and Sophia in the garden, the three of them laughing together, looking for all the world like a family. "They've been watching us," Alexander said quietly. "It's worse than that," Mrs. Chen replied. "Your board scheduled an emergency meeting. They're concerned about your focus." The meeting was brutal. 10 board members sat around the mahogany table, their expressions ranging from concerned to openly hostile. "Alexander, we're worried about you," started Thomas Bradford, his father's oldest friend and the board's chairman. "These past few months, you've been distant, distracted. Important decisions have been delayed while you've been focused on renovation projects." "I'm focused on giving this estate purpose," Alexander countered. "You're focused on playing house with your employee," snapped Victoria Chen, no relation to Mrs. Chen, but equally blunt. "Do you have any idea how this looks? The liability issues alone." "Elena isn't just my employee," Alexander interrupted. "She's exactly our point," Thomas interjected. "Alexander, your father built this company into what it is today. You have responsibilities, obligations. You can't just abandon them because you've developed feelings for someone inappropriate." The word inappropriate hung in the air like poison. "There's nothing inappropriate about caring for someone," Alexander said through gritted teeth. "Then make it official," Victoria challenged. "Marry her. Put a ring on her finger. That's the only way to make this remotely acceptable to shareholders, to society, to anyone who matters." Alexander's hands clenched into fists. "I will not be manipulated into marriage as some kind of PR move." "Then end it," Thomas said flatly. "Before it destroys everything your father built. Before you become a laughingstock. Before you lose this company." The ultimatum was clear: his relationship or his position. Elena or his legacy. That evening, Alexander didn't show up for dinner at Elena's cottage. Or the next evening. Or the one after that. By the third day, Elena knew something was wrong. She found him in his study, surrounded by papers, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "Alexander," she said softly from the doorway. He looked up, and the pain in his eyes made her heart drop. "We need to talk," he said. Elena sat down across from him, fear coiling in her stomach. "What's happened?" "The board is demanding I choose," Alexander said tiredly. "Between you and the company. Between us and everything I'm supposed to be responsible for." "Then the choice is obvious," Elena said, her voice steady even as her heart shattered. "You choose the company. Your legacy. Everything you've worked for." "Elena." "No, listen to me," she interrupted. "I knew this was too good to be true. People like me don't get fairy tale endings with people like you. That's just reality." She stood up, needing to leave before she broke down completely. "Thank you for everything you've done for us. The cottage, the job, all of it. We'll be fine. We always are." "Stop," Alexander said, standing as well. "Just stop. You're doing it again, assuming I'm going to leave, deciding for me that this can't work." "Because it can't." Elena's voice cracked. "Look at what's happening. They're writing articles about us, questioning your judgment, threatening your position. How is that sustainable? How can we build something real when the entire world is trying to tear it apart?" "By fighting for it," Alexander said fiercely. by choosing each other anyway. And what about Sophia? Elena demanded. What happens when she gets used to this life, this world, and then it all gets ripped away? When you decide it's too complicated, too messy, too much trouble? I would never. You don't know that. Elena was crying now, all her fears spilling out. You don't know what you'll want in a year, or 5 years, or 10. You don't know if you'll resent us for what you gave up. And I won't put my daughter through that pain. Alexander moved around the desk, taking Elena's hands in his. Then let me prove it to you. Let me show you that I'm not going anywhere.
How?
Elena whispered. Marry me. The words fell between them like a bomb. What? Elena breathed. Marry me, Alexander repeated. Not because the board wants it. Not because of optics or PR or any of that. Marry me because I love you. Because I love Sophia. Because I want to wake up every morning and know you're both mine, and I'm yours, and we're building something permanent together. Elena stared at him, her mind reeling. Alexander, that's insane. We've been together for barely any time at all. I don't care, he interrupted. I've lived 34 years feeling like I was just going through the motions, doing what was expected. These past months with you have been more real, more alive, than my entire life before. I don't need more time to know what I want. I want you. I want Sophia. I want us to be a family, officially and forever. This is crazy, Elena said, but she wasn't pulling away. Maybe, Alexander agreed. But isn't love always a little crazy? Isn't it always a leap of faith? Elena thought about Sophia asking if Alexander was family. Thought about the way her daughter's face lit up when he walked into a room. Thought about the way she herself had started to imagine futures that included him, plans that stretched beyond just survival into actual happiness. If we do this, she said slowly, it's not just about us. It's about Sophia too. She comes first. Always. I wouldn't have it any other way, Alexander said. Elena, I'm not asking you to marry me so I can keep my position on the board. I'm asking you to marry me because I can't imagine my life without you in it. Because you've shown me what it means to actually live. If the board doesn't accept that, then I'll walk away from the company. I'll walk away from all of it. You can't mean that, Elena whispered. I've never meant anything more in my life, Alexander replied. You and Sophia are my purpose now. Everything else is just details. Elena searched his face, looking for doubt, for hesitation, for any sign that this was romantic impulse rather than genuine commitment. But all she saw was love, fierce, determined, and absolutely certain. Ask me again, she said softly. Ask me properly. Alexander dropped to one knee right there in his study, still holding her hands, his eyes never leaving hers. Elena Maria Martinez, he said, will you marry me? Will you let me be Sophia's father, not just in my heart but officially? Will you build a life with me, knowing it won't always be easy, but that I will fight for us every single day? Yes, Elena breathed, tears streaming down her face. Yes, yes, yes. When they told Sophia the next morning, the little girl's reaction was pure, unfiltered joy. Does this mean Alexander is my daddy now? She asked, bouncing on her toes. Alexander crouched down to her level. If that's okay with you. If you want me to be. Sophia threw her arms around his neck. I've always wanted a daddy, she said into his shoulder. And I really wanted it to be you. As Alexander held the little girl, as Elena watched them with her heart so full it felt like it might burst, she realized that fairy tales didn't have to be about princes and castles. Sometimes they were about gardeners and billionaires and little girls who believed in magic. Sometimes they were about choosing love, even when it was complicated. Sometimes they were about leaping into the unknown and trusting someone to catch you. And sometimes, just sometimes, they came true. The wedding took place on a December morning, 6 weeks after Alexander's proposal, in the estate's conservatory surrounded by flowers that Elena had spent weeks coaxing into winter bloom. It was small, intimate, just Mrs. Chun, a few trusted staff members, and a handful of Alexander's true friends, people who'd supported him when the board had tried to force his hand. In the end, Alexander had done exactly what he'd promised. He'd walked away. He'd resigned from his father's company, sold his shares, and used the money to establish a foundation dedicated to providing access to art, nature, and education for underprivileged children. The Hartwell estate had become its headquarters, with the East Wing transformed into a vibrant community center where kids from all over the region could come to paint, garden, play, and simply be children. The board had been shocked. The tabloids had been merciless. But Alexander had never looked back. "You look beautiful," Mrs. Chin said, adjusting Elena's simple white dress. Nothing fancy, just a knee-length creation that made her feel like herself while still honoring the occasion. Sophia stood beside her in a flower girl dress she'd helped choose, pink with layers of tulle that made her feel like the princess she'd always dreamed of being. "I'm nervous," Elena admitted. "That's normal," Mrs. Chin replied with a rare smile. "But you're making the right choice. I've worked for the Hartwell family for 20 years, and I've never seen Alexander as happy as he's been these past months. You've given him a life worth living." "He's given us the same," Elena said softly. When the small string quartet began to play, when Elena walked down the makeshift aisle with Sophia clutching her hand, she saw Alexander waiting at the altar and felt every doubt dissolve. He looked at her like she was the only person in the world, like she hung the moon and stars, like she was precious beyond measure. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They'd written their own vows, words that reflected the unlikely journey that had brought them to this moment. "Elena," Alexander began, his voice thick with emotion, "you taught me that wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, but in moments of genuine connection. You showed me that a life lived alone, no matter how successful, is no life at all. You gave me purpose, hope, and a family I never dreamed I could have. I promise to honor you, to support your dreams, to be the partner you deserve." And Sophia, he turned to the little girl, who was watching with wide eyes, "I promise to be the father you've always wanted, to teach you, to protect you, to love you unconditionally. Both of you have made me the richest man alive, and no board of directors or bank balance could ever compete with what you've given me." Elena's vows were equally emotional. "Alexander, when I first came to this estate, I was just trying to survive. To give my daughter a stable life, and maybe catch my breath after years of running. I never expected to find a home. I never expected to find you. You saw us, really saw us, when we were invisible to most of the world. You heard my whispered promises to Sophia, and decided to help make them real. You've shown me that it's okay to let someone in, to trust, to believe in futures that seem impossible. I promise to stand beside you in whatever comes next. I promise to remind you, on hard days, why we made this choice. And I promise to love you, not for what you can give us, but for who you are, kind, genuine, and brave enough to choose love over expectation." When the officiant pronounced them married, when Alexander kissed her softly while Sophia cheered, Elena felt a peace she'd never known. This was real. This was hers. This was forever. The reception was held in the conservatory, a casual affair with food prepared by the estate's chef and music from the same quartet. Sophia was the star of the evening, dancing with anyone who would indulge her, showing off her new dress to everyone who would look. But the moment that would stay with Elena forever came later, after most guests had left, when the three of them stood together in the main house's grand foyer. "Welcome home," Alexander said, squeezing her hand. Home. The word resonated through Elena like a bell. Not the cottage, as much as she'd loved it. Not the mansion itself, beautiful as it was. But wherever the three of them were together, that was home. In the months that followed, their unconventional family settled into a rhythm that worked for them. Elena still tended the gardens, though now as director of the Foundation's horticulture therapy program, teaching children to find peace and purpose in growing things. Alexander threw himself into running the foundation, discovering a talent for fundraising and program development that had been wasted in the corporate world. And Sophia thrived. She attended preschool in town but came home to an estate that had transformed from a sterile monument to wealth into a vibrant community hub. Other children played in the gardens she'd once explored alone. The east wing echoed with laughter and creativity. The walls that had once felt like barriers now felt like embraces. One spring afternoon, nearly a year after the wedding, Elena found Alexander in their bedroom, standing at the window that overlooked the gardens. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "Just marveling at how different everything looks," he replied. "A year ago, this place felt like a mausoleum. Now listen." Elena tilted her head. From outside came the sounds of children laughing, of volunteers chatting as they tended the community garden plots, of life happening in every corner of the estate. "We did this," Alexander said quietly. "Together." "No," Elena corrected gently. "Sophia did this. That little girl who asked for her own garden, she started all of this. She reminded both of us what matters." As if summoned, Sophia burst into the room, now 4.5 and full of opinions about everything. "Mommy, Daddy." She'd taken to calling Alexander Daddy without hesitation, and each time it made his eyes shine with emotion. "The roses you named after me are blooming. Come see, come see." They followed their daughter outside, where sure enough, the Sophia roses were in full bloom, their pink petals catching the afternoon light. "They're beautiful," Elena breathed. "Like you," Alexander murmured, pulling her close while Sophia danced among the flowers. "I never thought this could be my life," Elena admitted. "A year and a half ago, I was terrified of losing my job, of letting Sophia down, of never being able to give her the life she deserved. Now look at us." "Now look at us," Alexander echoed. "Elena, I need to tell you something." She turned to face him, reading the seriousness in his expression. "What is it?" "I got a call from the foundation's director today. We've received enough donations and grants to expand the program nationally. We could help thousands of children gain access to art and nature education. But it would mean more travel for me, more time away from home. I told them I needed to discuss it with you first because this is our life, our decision together." Elena considered this, watching Sophia play among the roses that bore her name. "Will it make a real difference? For kids like she might have been if things had gone differently?" "Yes," Alexander said without hesitation. "It could change lives." "Then we do it," Elena decided. "We'll figure out the logistics. Maybe I can travel with you sometimes, or we can hire a coordinator to handle some of the travel. We've built something special here, Alexander. It would be selfish to keep it just for ourselves." He kissed her forehead. "Have I told you today that I love you?" "Twice," she replied with a smile. "But I never get tired of hearing it." As the sun began to set, painting the gardens in shades of gold and amber, the three of them sat together on the grass, Sophia between her parents, pointing out clouds and making up stories about the shapes she saw. "That one looks like Señor Conejo," she announced, pointing at a particularly fluffy cloud. "It does," Alexander agreed seriously. "What's he doing up there?" "Flying to visit the moon bunnies," Sophia explained with the absolute certainty of a child who knew the truth of things. "To tell them about our garden, so they can make one too." Elena and Alexander exchanged smiles over their daughter's head, both thinking the same thing, that out of the mouths of babes came wisdom. That sharing what you had, spreading joy and growth and opportunity, was perhaps the greatest purpose anyone could have. "You know what, sweetness?" Elena said, pulling Sophia into her lap. "I think Señor Conejo has the right idea. Telling others about gardens so they can grow their own. That's exactly what Daddy and I are going to do." "Good," Sophia said, snuggling against her mother. "Everyone should have a garden, even if it's just a little one." As night fell over the estate, as lights came on in the cottage and the main house and the community center, as families from town loaded their cars with vegetables from the garden plots and paintings from the art studio, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her here. It had started with a whisper in a garden, with promises made to a little girl who asked when they'd have their own flowers. It had been overheard by a man who was drowning in wealth but starving for purpose. And it had bloomed into something neither of them could have imagined, a love that transcended class and circumstance, a family built on choice rather than blood, and a legacy that would touch countless lives. "What are you thinking about?" Alexander asked, noticing her distant expression. That fairy tales are real, Elena replied. They just don't always look the way we expect them to. Sometimes the prince is lonely and looking for meaning. Sometimes the princess is a single mother who tends gardens and fights to survive. And sometimes the happily ever after is actually a beginning, a chance to build something that matters, together. I like our version better than the traditional ones, Alexander said. Me too, Elena agreed. Sophia, nearly asleep between them, mumbled, Told you everyone needs a garden, Mommy. And she had. That wise little girl with her simple truth had been right all along. Everyone needed a garden, a place to grow, to heal, to bloom. A place where whispered promises could take root and flourish. A place where love could transform even the most barren landscape into something beautiful. The Hartwell estate had become that garden, not just for Elena and Sophia and Alexander, but for every child who walked through its gates. And the seeds they planted there, of hope, of possibility, of unconditional love, would grow for generations to come. As stars emerged overhead and Sophia's breathing deepened into sleep, Elena and Alexander sat together in their garden, holding the life they'd built, grateful beyond words for the moment a billionaire had overheard a maid's whispered promises and decided to help make them come true. It wasn't the ending of their story. It was just the beginning of everything that mattered. Years later, when Sophia was grown and working alongside her parents at the foundation, she would tell visitors about how it all started. About a little girl who wanted her own garden, a mother who made impossible promises, and a man who believed that everyone deserved beauty and hope and a place to call home. She would point to the roses that still bore her name, blooming faithfully twice a year, and she would say, This is what happens when love hears what's needed and decides to answer. This is what happens when people choose each other, again and again, even when it's complicated. This is what gardens and hearts can grow when given the chance. And every child who heard her story would leave believing in possibilities. In gardens. In love that transforms. In whispered promises that sometimes, miraculously, come true.